If you've been following my channel for a while, you probably know I have quite a few problems with Nintendo of America, especially in their localization department. But in the past few months, to my surprise, they managed to once again outdo themselves. In a recent Kotaku interview, Reggie We Make Good Games Fizame explained their new process of localization going forward. In an effort to keep all versions of a game the same, they will now be sending representatives to Japan from both the American branch and European branch to work directly with the game's developers to ensure the final product is culturally relevant in all areas of the world, effectively censoring the product before the Japanese version is finished, with the intent of reducing regional differences. This might very well mean we'll be getting what would have been the Nintendo of America localized version of the game in all regions. It almost seems like Nintendo's response to fans' outcry about censorship is, instead of staying more true to the developer's original vision, they decided to double down on it. For those who don't know, this is far from the beginning. While Nintendo has always taken certain liberties in localizing their games, in 2015, the Nintendo Treehouse started becoming infamous for their shoddy localization jobs. I've already mentioned these cases in previous videos, but 2015 brought us the likes of Fire Emblem Fates, Triforce Heroes, and Xenoblade Chronicles X, just to name a few games that led to this fan outcry mentioned previously. Even when they're not directly in charge of the localization, if a game ends up on a Nintendo platform, it still seems to suffer from needless changes. Such was the case with games like Tokyo Mirage, Dragon Ball Fusions, and several games in the Fire Emblem series. That's not to say that needless changes are exclusives to Nintendo, they're just the best at doing it. There are several games, not just Nintendo games, that suffer from these things, sacrificing the original vision of a work to make a game more appropriate for Western audiences. But many times, these changes boil down to imposing arbitrary moral standards held by a company's localization department. They're not intended to lower a game's age rating, nor to abide by country-specific laws. However, that's not what the job of the localizations department should be. The job of the team should be making sure the original intent of every line and interaction within a game carries the same meaning. A direct translation isn't ideal, as I've mentioned in previous videos. If it was, you'd end up with a lot of janky dialogue. So their job should be merely taking these lines of dialogue and scenes and making them come through properly for every region. However, some people don't agree with this and are perfectly fine receiving a product with heavy changes in this regard. If we look back to Fire Emblem Fates as an example, sometimes this is due to ignorance or just a simple misunderstanding. However, some people fully understand the situation and they simply don't give a shit. They are perfectly happy with whatever morally policed garbage is handed to them, often defending it simply because of brand loyalty or because it lines up with their own moral code, which they feel everyone must abide by. An example of the first case is one you've probably all heard about. However, due to it being in category 1, chances are you've heard wrong from our lovely gaming journalist friends. Whenever these cases of localization come up, we're told in countless articles that we just don't understand, but in reality it's often the case that these journalists themselves are the ones who don't understand. In the case of Fates, infamously, there's the drugging scene, which all started from a simple post on hellsite.tumblr.com in which a girl severely misrepresented the scene. Then, without any fact checking, because Kotaku and Polygon and all these other little gaming outlets never bothered to actually check a story before they run it, released it to the public, and since then I've had to sit through countless articles stating how Corin used gay conversion therapy to change a homosexual woman straight. Again, this isn't the case. The character asked for Corin's help to get over her nervousness around women. In his attempt to help her, he gives her a powder that makes it so she sees him as a woman. This is so she can innocently interact with him, therefore slowly overcoming her fear. I do agree though that it makes no sense at all that this character isn't bi, just like a few other characters in Fates. It is, however, not some date, rape, gay conversion scene that Japan gave the okay to. These game journalists are the ones who don't understand. They speak as little Japanese as they are able to do research. They don't convey the issues of the game to us, they just see one article go up on their friend's website and then look at the time, it's time to write the same piece on theirs. It's like an Ouroboros where they're just eating their own tail, or maybe a better comparison is a human centipede where they're just regurgitating each other's shit endlessly. For the second category, let's just take this video here released by IGN on the same topic of Fates. In this video, they make various points that I continuously see within comment sections when the topic of localization comes up, so let's get into it.
Yeah, no, that's what localization is. And if you're up in arms about this, like, no offense, but this song ain't about you. Like, there's more to this story than just your interest. And it may be coming from a passionate place. You just want to be more involved and play the game as it was intended. You love Japanese culture. You love certain things about it. And you think that's fine. But I'm sorry, this is not just about you.
One of the first arguments they make in favor of the localization is that it's not about you, the consumer, who's upset, but this argument is something that falls flat on its face every time I see it pop up in some lovely gaming website's comment section, as it's no more about me, the upset consumer, than it is about the consumer who's happy with the change. I'd argue if it's about anyone's say in how the game should be, then it should be about the original creator's vision, and keeping that creative vision intact.
Also, like, if you're upset about this, take the time that you would have spent writing a really angry letter or message board post to learn Japanese and import the original version of the game and play the homophobic thing you love to play. Like, there's plenty of uses of your time. Like, import a 3DS. Play that version if that's what you want. Like.
And just like a typical comment section, one of the next points is my favorite. The idea that someone should have to learn an entirely new language just to properly experience a piece of work with the original intent of the piece is ridiculous in this day and age. The whole point of a localization is to make a product accessible in a different region, not something that just kind of resembles the original product.
This seems like it's out for good reasons, and yet there is some outcry of censorship for you kids. This is self-censorship because Nintendo is ultimately doing this themselves.
The idea that a localizations team changes our self-censorship has always been an asinine concept to me. I understand you could argue it's in a localizations team's right, but just because they have the ability to do so doesn't mean it's inherently just by default. As I've mentioned throughout this video, as I, the consumer, will not support it, and will be right here bitching about it, telling everyone why it's wrong, as they aren't the creators of the product. If you want an example of self-censorship, then look at Skullgirls. Originally the game had more panty shots, but the team themselves went back and made a change later to remove a large amount of these panty shots. They decided it was a better choice for their product, and it's self-censorship because they created the product, the same team.
Yeah. But ultimately it does not affect how this game's going to play. Ultimately, they still capture a lot of what the core game is, which is it's an awesome Fire Emblem, even if it is split into 3 pieces.
The beautiful face animations, and kind of get a sense for who the characters are in it. To be fair, there was no skill involved there, right? Like, you had to find the right spot on their forehead or their necklace or wherever to rub in order to build the relationship. It was not skill based. Like, anyone could do it. It was kind of silly.
I mean, it was like half the puzzles in something like Hotel Dusk or something, where you rotate an object, look for a glimmering light, tap it.
But not even that. It was like the simplest interaction possible. So I'm not sad that's gone.
I've combined these 2 points because they suffer from the same issue. Just because something's not challenging or isn't directly related to the core gameplay doesn't mean it has no right to be within a game. The value is assigned by the developer of the game. The localizer shouldn't get to choose what individual pieces of a product do or do not have value. But even given all this, maybe you're not convinced. So let's take a look at Fates and how they decided to handle the localization of what was left in the game. There were a lot of choices for what I could use here, many of which I've shown off as an example in previous videos. However, today I chose to use a section of Parallel 5 this time. So first, let's take a look at the Nintendo Treehouse localization.
Hey, you! Huh.
And now a translated version of the original. Because of the Treehouse's need once again to insert wacky and quirky dialogue into every character, the original meaning of the scene is completely devalued. This is supposed to be a tense situation, but instead the character just sounds like a complete fucking idiot. To its credit though, this character still has some semblance of a personality, instead of being turned into a complete joke who only wants to make pickle puns. I still can't get over this. We should have moved past this at this point. Several years back, 4Kids style localization used to be the norm. That's why sometimes when games are re-released, we even get a relocalized version, like with Final Fantasy VI or Persona 1 as a very good example, because those old localization jobs just don't hold up to the current standard or to the original script. Again, Nintendo isn't the only company that does this. There are entire websites and channels dedicated to showing off poor localization and censorship done in Western releases. I chose to take a heavy look at Fates today because to me it's still the pinnacle of both a terrible localization and a ludicrous defense force. I understand that sometimes changes need to be made to a game when switching regions, but this isn't how you do it. Xseed, for example, when they localized the Senran Kagura series, simply removed the characters' ages, so all the content and everything surrounding it stays intact, as the ages of these characters aren't important, since over here in America land this wouldn't be appropriate for people this young. It's a good solution that localizes the product without sacrificing anything. How companies like Nintendo and such handle these situations just isn't something that should be stood up for in the modern day, no matter who's doing it. We all deserve better.